Hi everyone. Great to see you again. This year at Visible, we're exploring relationships and how people can thrive through connection. And our belief is that the right relationships with the right people at the right time can unlock all kinds of potential and opportunity for you as a founder and investor. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Mike Priest. I am the founder of Visible, and I'm really excited to introduce Brett today. Brett is a multi-time guest now with our content here at Visible. He's the managing partner of Bread and Butter Ventures based in Minneapolis. Also the former managing director of the Techstars Farm to Fork Accelerator. Some really exciting news as well because Bread and Butter just raised Fund 4 at $40 million. And really all about backing seed stage companies, innovating in technology, food technology, digital health, enterprise SaaS. But just been a great partner of ours. And Brett, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. It's fun. It's always fun.
Anything I messed up there or anything else you'd like to add before we jump in?
No, you got it. You nailed it. Great job.
Great. And for the if you guys do not follow Brett on LinkedIn, please do. His content for founders is incredible, and I think really just has a lot of insight and not a lot of words, which is hard to find. So I think you do a great job of distilling down hard things in great posts. But today we're going to talk about finding the right investors, investor outreach, pitching investors, and then just some seeing kind of where things take us. But I think, Brett, you have a lot of unique angles you can bring to this thing as a former builder yourself, and then working with thousands of founders between Techstars and Bread and Butter. And now you've been doing this for a little bit of time. And so, kind of kick things off the bat, the relationship that founders have with their investors in venture funds is usually well over a decade now. I think like exits have they used to say exits could be anywhere from 8 to 10 years. Now the data is saying 10 or more. So that's a really long relationship to have. How should founders think about their relationship with investors and potential investors for the long haul?
Yeah, I sometimes when I give talks about this, I actually like to tell the founders the average relationship that I have with a company that I invest in is going to last longer than the average marriage lasts in the United States, which is like actual fact. I think the average marriage in the US lasts like 7.5 years. And I'm on cap tables, especially with successful companies, longer than that on average. And so it's something that's super important. And we think about it on our side, and founders should think about it on their side as well. When we are evaluating a team, one of the things we're looking at is culture. And it's not necessarily just the culture within their organization, but it's also their culture fit with us as a fund. And do we want to work with this person? Is there culture mesh? And as a founder, from the founder seat, is the partner that's going to be on my board or going to lead this investment, do I work well with them? Do I vibe with them? Can they give me real feedback, or are they hard to give real feedback? Things like that. And you have to really dig in and understand those relationships because they are important.
Yeah, we every year we do a survey, kind of reverse for founders of would you recommend your current investors to other founders, kind of like an NPS, and we found it's like the same as airlines, which is not great as like as like the punchline there. What are some like maybe early warning signs like that this person might not be a fit for the long term, whether I guess they are a current investor or potential one, but like any word in either direction, right? Like you see in founders or vice versa. Like what are some warning signs there?
Yeah, I think one place that people often get into trouble is what is that long-term vision for the company or organization, and is that aligned between founder and investor? And it's really important because you can have different visions that are probably all okay, but if as an investor, I want you to basically go all or nothing, right? I want you to go for broke and try and build a multi-billion-dollar company, and I'm okay with a zero outcome. But if you as a founder are, listen, I'm going to try and get this thing to 5 million in revenue and sell it for 7x and still own 60% when I sell it. Like that's a great founder outcome, but not necessarily what we want to see as a fund. But there are investors that might be interested in that. And so step one is just making sure, and this is where I think that a lot of founders get into trouble is they tend to say what they think investors want to hear there versus like what's actually on their mind, what they actually truly believe. And it's so much more important to just have honest, open conversations around mission, vision, values of your organization. And if there's not a good fit, find out early, because it can be miserable for both sides if that those types of things aren't aligned. Even from like a not necessarily just like exit, but also like product vision, mission, right? Like because investors say, "Oh, you should be building this, you should be building this," and at the end of the day, it's the CEO and that those founders' decision, but it can really cause some rifts and make it much more difficult for you to execute against what you want to execute if you have somebody always in your ear telling you to do something different. So making sure there's alignment on mission, vision, values is critical at the beginning.
Let's say we are aligned, or we thought we're aligned. We are no longer aligned. You are now an investor. We just said how long these relationships last, and it's incredibly hard to get an investor off of the cap table. Probably much harder than it is to get than getting divorced in that example. Like, what are things I could do as a founder or investor to help maybe write us back into seeing? Can I, or is this just like an irreparable relationship at this point?
It probably depends on like how it's happened. I think the most common issue for investor founder rifts is lack of communication. It's a founders stop sending regular updates. Which Mike, like I'm a
Yeah,
huge like I talk a lot about sending regular updates. And both our whole entire fund does. And on like a little quick tangent to that, like one of the things that we found amongst our portfolio is that our highest performing companies are also the best communicators. And people are pretty good at sending updates when things are going really well. But like as soon as things kind of go sideways or go flat, like all of a sudden updates stop coming. And I think that is a huge cause of issues between these relationships, and it's not necessarily because like things aren't going well. It's just like when you don't know what's going on with the portfolio company, you can't help. And when one of my investors, like my fund is backed by we've a couple hundred LPs across all of our fund vintages now. When one of them asks me how a company's going, because they happen to like latch onto one investment we made, and they ask, "Oh, how's XYZ company doing?" And I haven't got an update from them in 6 months. Like I look like an idiot, and that doesn't feel good for me either. And so those little things cause rifts in companies, from the not being able to help, most importantly, but also just not knowing what's going on within our own investment portfolio can cause risks. And you can get back on track from that, I think, if you just start again, which is like, it seems easy, but it's actually can be hard to do, to get over that mental hurdle of I haven't sent. I've had this conversation with a lot of founders in our portfolio that have fallen off. Like, oh, but how do I just start again? Like, I haven't done it in 6 months. Like, just send one, and you'll be surprised, and so you can rebuild trust through communicating, I think, is the best way to do it. If there's been trust lost from a lack of communication side, if there's a rifts that are deeper, like where like maybe an investor did something to cause the rift. It's not always the founder, right? Investors do some stupid stuff also. And so maybe if there's a rift that came that way, well, oftentimes the best thing you can do as a founder is, the worst thing you probably do is shut them off completely, because that can just become problematic also. But be regular with communications to them, that you'd send everybody else. So don't come out of communication. Continue to communicate in a cordial way. You never know when you're going to need them to sign off on something or vote on something that you need to happen. And so if you cut somebody out completely because you can't get them off your cap table, it's going to be much more difficult in the long run. And I think that like having just honest conversations is always important. And so hard conversations don't get easier with time.
yeah,
They just don't. And so if you start having like little issues, you start seeing like little things that are tough from a founder perspective or from an investor perspective, it's better to just confront them early and have just an honest, open conversation about like what you're feeling, how you're doing, how things might get better, or change your work styles. And you might agree to disagree, but at least you have like an open, like good professional line of communication if you need it.
yeah. I think that's such sage advice. Just keeping people in the loop of just because you're going to need them at some point, right? Even if it's just to sign a legal doc,
Yep.
which is can be incredibly hard to chase people down. Um, Moving on, have you specifically seen cases where founders have prioritized like the wrong thing and raised? Maybe it's um, a higher valuation or a deal getting done quicker, but ultimately prioritizing or optimizing for those things has led to a bad partnership.
I mean, for sure, that happens. If sometimes you don't have a choice as a founder too, right? Like if you're, especially in hard macro, we've been in a hard macro the last 2 years, and money's tight. It's tougher to raise right now than it has been for a few years. And so sometimes there's not as much opportunity to be picky and choosy from a founder seat of where you take your money from. But if you do, like if you're able to raise, get multiple term sheets, if sometimes people optimize for the wrong things, and most often it's optimization for valuation is the most common thing, where they'll just go with the best valuation that they get, and strategic alignment be damned. Like, we're going to take this 15 million on a 60 instead of a 15 million on a 55 or 50, and you want to be in the same strike zone, but it is far more important to have like a strategic relationship that can be helpful, help you grow as founder, help you grow, help you with introductions to subsequent rounds of capital, help you make with strategic, business dev, and, introductions. There's so many other ways that people can add value, and you don't want to lose sight of that, especially if like you kind of get a weird feel early on from a potential investor. Don't optimize. You should not optimize for valuation, in my opinion.
Yeah. Great. Um, Again, kind of under the finding the right investors for my business, whether I'm just getting started or maybe I've raised a little bit of capital. The pool is always larger than the ones you should probably raise from. Any frameworks you've helped coach founders, whether it's XRs or bread and butter, like any frameworks you've thought of like how I can help narrow that list, or kind of find the right fit that works well?
Yeah, it's tough to do like from a like a culture standpoint. It's actually harder to like cull a list. And again, like you still want to maintain like a large like sales funnel. I mean, fundraising is sales. Like that's fundraising is just like sales. You want to build a big funnel, top of funnel. And you want to run as many people through that top of funnel as possible. Now, like one of the things that we recommend is that you tier out. So you go out, let's say you go do research on 100 different venture funds right now, and you want to tier them out. And so like your tier one, tier two, tier three, and your tier one are those investors that are, they've great stage fit, great vertical fit, and for some reason you think they're a dream investor. You're really aligned with them from a culture standpoint. You really like the blog or the LinkedIn post or whatever that the investor writes or does, where you think it'll just be a really good working relationship. Your tier two is great stage fit, great culture fit. I mean, great stage fit, great vertical fit, but you don't know as much about the fund yet, and you're going to need to meet with them. And your tier three is going to be more of those generalist funds that are a little bit less specific, and you're going to spend the most time trying to get to those tier ones. You're going to network harder. You're going to meet a friend who knows a friend who happens to know that the GP of that fund. So you're going to work really hard to get warm introductions, and you're spending most time working towards those. And so it's more about time allocation in a fundraising process of like, where do you put it? But you do really still need to fill your top of funnel full as possible when you're fundraising, because that's what drives, from an investor seat. The only reason I have to make a commitment to a company is that I'm afraid somebody else is going to do it first. And so if you don't have like a really full funnel, and I don't feel that as an investor, I'm actually arguably doing my job better if I wait another month before I make an investment decision, because you get another month of statistics and data on you. And so you have to really drive FOMO from the founder seat. And that's your job. And so the best way to do that is fill your funnel with investors, and then make sure you do your diligence on them before you take their money.
Yep. I love the tier one, two, and three framework there. Do you recommend founders reach out to like a mix of tier one, two, and three when I get started? Am I going to reach out to tier three first and practice on them? Like, how do you think about grouping the different tiers together?
Yep. Yeah. Start with lower, tier two, tier three for first couple of your first several investor meetings, because you're going to get better at pitching your company. Through anywhere between your 5 to 10 first meetings, you're going to really be refining your pitch and getting feedback on your pitch. You also just have like some friendlies in your network that hopefully you have like 2 or 3 friendlies that you should go to first, where they'll give you honest feedback. Where sometimes like a fund, there's a lot of easy ways to pass on a startup where you don't give them real feedback, like, oh, you're a little too early for us. Like that's a really easy way to pass on a startup, where it's not, how do you change your pitch based on that? It's not, but if you have a couple friendlies, like go to talk to them first. And then once you feel like your pitch is pretty well refined, that's when you hit your tier one. But then you want to do it in bulk. So you don't want to, once you feel good about your pitch and your, how, is it landing, is your story arc working, those types of things, then you want to go do nothing but fundraise for 2 or 3 weeks. Like you literally want to send out 30 emails, 30 forwardable emails at a time for the first week to try and load up your next 2 weeks, and then next Monday send another 30, so your pipeline is stacked. So that's how like inevitably in those meetings, found investors talk, so they'll know like, oh man, this company's pitching everybody, like FOMO, like you're creating FOMO. The other reason is like when you're in a meeting, inevitably, an investor's going to ask the founder, "Oh, how's the fundraise going?" You say, "Oh, we just started on Monday, but we got 30 meetings over the next 2 weeks." And so you can be honest without being braggadocious around it, but to drive some of that FOMO as well.
Love that. Love that advice. Anything else you've seen um, with founders that kind of separates the ones who run a process very well versus ones that struggle? Is it the fact that they just have a process, or like any common mistakes you see as well that might derail a fundraise?
Yeah, I mean, a couple things that you should like just almost like baseline starter. You got it, your starter pack. You got to have all your documentation ready to go before you start fundraising. So you got to have financials, financial projections. A lot of companies that are really impressive right now are doing really interesting investment memos, which is different. So they're actually writing their own investment memo, and it can really differentiate you and separate you as a startup. The ones I've seen that have been really cool have been done on Notion, and so that's a really neat thing. So you just get all your stuff ready, so when an investor asks you for it, you can get it to them quickly. You're not like rushing to catch up, and then it's like not that great. Get your data room ready ahead of time before you start fundraising as well. Then bulk, I'd say another big mistake people make is they do kind of string it out. They try to do 2 or 3 or 4 meetings a week versus like just trying to do nothing but fundraise. And I think that's a huge mistake. It just makes your fundraise last forever. I think another big mistake is just in the planning process of understanding what type of round you actually can go rate, like have a chance of raising as a founder, like, based on the metrics you currently have. Are you raising the right round that's for you? And so, if you have pre-seed metrics and you try to go raise a big seed round, like you're going to spin your wheels, you're going to waste a lot of warm introductions, and a lot of people are going to tell you no, and you're going to fundraise for 4 months and you're not going to be able to raise the round. Same thing, like if you're trying to raise a Series A and you don't have Series A metrics, like, and I think that actually might be the biggest mistake is founders don't do a great job understanding where they are relative to the current macro, and so they try to raise the wrong amount. And so really make sure you have a chance of raising it. And there's like the reason that's hard is because like there's always outliers. There's always these outliers to fundraising, and there is no true black and white. And so you could be like a pre-seed company and go raise like a $40 million pre-seed round at a $150 million valuation. But like guess how many times a year that happens? Like not very many. Yeah. And so like that, just giving yourself the best chance you have to raise the round that you want to raise. And then one other like just quick like another differentiating thing is when you are out raising, you're going to have a lot of pitches, and your job as a founder is to get people to say yes or no. You want to move people to a decision. And so what ends up happening is you end up having a lot of these fence sitters or people that are kind of ghosting, that aren't super responsive. And my general rule of thumb is within 7 days, not business days. So basically every week, if you haven't heard from a fund, you should ping them. You should give them a quick update, like a quick business update. So it's like a couple bullets of like, hey, this is what happened last week. This is what we did well. This is what didn't go well. Let us know what next steps are in your, for us to get in front of you. Like what's next? How can we keep it moving along with you all? So send a quick business update, and that works really well to continue to drive engagement, and it shows that you're a great communicator.
One piece of advice I heard related to that too, which I think is super smart, is like always kind of holding back a piece of good news as well that you can always use in that weekly update, right? Like something you already signed XYZ Enterprise as a customer, but you wait a week, and I think that's super smart. I think Brett, when we first
customize it,
when we first talk about time, like how much time it actually takes to get around done, I think it might have been me and you talk about the 1-3-1 of like 1 month to get everything together, 3 months to fundraise, and then 1 month to kind of put all the docs together and actually just chase signatures and get the deal done. I can't actually remember when that was. Was it like during the zero interest rate era, before that, or after that? But I'm curious now, like how long are you seeing things take to get done at the early stage, call it pre-seed seed stage? Like how long are you seeing those things take? Has that changed now with the new macro world we're living in?
It has changed, and things have lengthened. So people are taking longer to raise rounds, and I say if you can't raise a round in 5 months, you're not going to be able to raise the round. I don't think that that's necessarily true. You can run a process that might take 6 months or 7 months even now. But I actually still kind of generally believe in what I said then, like 131. And if anything, actually, I think that even if you run a process correctly, you should have pretty good indications of like it's still at month prep, but within the first month of pitching, you should have pretty good indicators if you're on track or you're the amount you're raising is kind of jiving with the macro in the market, and will you do you have a good chance of getting a term sheet or not? And it might still take a couple more months of pitching, but like within that first month, you should get a pretty good general idea. And one of the reasons is like now, as again, as a fund, since there's less competition from a fund perspective, we can take a little bit longer. Like we don't have to rush to term sheets. We can continue to work with you, get to know you better over a couple month period. So, the person that leads you around, you might have met in your first month, but they just might not have to write a term sheet for 6 or 8 weeks where they used to have to write a term sheet in 2 weeks. And so that is extending timelines. And it doesn't mean that they're not interested, or it doesn't mean they're the bad people either. It just means that there's a little bit less competition and they're trying to do their best jobs as well.
Love it. Let's talk about kind of getting connected now to the right investors throughout this process. You mentioned like the one of the friend of a friend getting a warm introduction. Like what are the best ways a founder should think about getting connected to Brett, right? He is my dream investor, tier one. How should I get connected to Brett, or any other of my tier one investors? And if I can't, can just kind of fill us in on like cold? Will that work as a strategy? Have you personally invested in a company that's reached out cold? What did that look like? If so,
Yep. So I'll answer the last one. So we have actually invested in cold outreach companies before. It is a smaller percentage of our portfolio for sure. But we have done it, and I think other firms do it as well. The key is like be very specific in your cold outreach. If it is a generic, email coming from a marketing automation tool that you then have sent to send us a follow-up 6 days later, that you like downloaded some sheet of investors, like those immediately get deleted. And like they don't even get to my desk, right? Like we have somebody that goes through kind of our inboxes of like the general reach out forms and things like that. And so, but the ones that are really customized, like, hey, Brett, like saw that you invested in this company and saw this blog post that you wrote, or watched your session with Mike, and thought you might be interested in, like, and get really like nitty gritty. And almost we might not invest, we might say, hey, you're not a fit for us, but we try to always respond to the founders that have obviously put time into getting to us. So like on our team, all of us do open office hours every Friday. Also, so like if we know it's not an investment fit, we'll say, hey, probably not going to be an investment fit, but if you want to meet, still happy to meet. Like, here's my link for my open office hours. And so we do that on our side. And I think that's generally true across the venture industry. If you're going to do cold outreach, it's got to be really, really customized. From how to get to people outside of the cold outreach, it is like what does your network allow you? Like where can you immediately get to? If you're really struggling to find any type of like connections that you can start networking your way to, try to cold outreach or try to get to one of their portfolio companies. Because what email I always open? An email from one of the CEOs that I'm an investor in. That is the email that always gets opened and always gets read. And so if you meet a founder that we're an investor in, at least your message is going to come across our desk and it's going to get eyeballs and it's going to get seen versus like, we get so many emails every day. Like sometimes like we just don't have time to go through like the generic ones that are more like obviously cold outreach. And so even if you did customize it, occasionally we might miss it. But if it comes from one of my founders' email addresses, like guess what? I'm reading that. So like that's and that's true for every fund in the world. So that's a great way to try and build. And again, it takes time, which is why tier one, you should do that. Work your way through it for your tier one funds.
yeah, I love that. Getting to the kind of now the no's and people saying, you mentioned this earlier actually, hey, it's too early, or you're too early, which is probably a polite no. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I think more likely than not, it is a polite no. What is the best way to manage those folks? Should I even think about them? Should I update them as I progress as a company? How should I bucket like the soft no's that don't give you the reason as to why?
I think a part of it depends is like if it's a no from a firm that when you've done your research, like this is a real like we're raising a seed and this is like more of a Series A fund. On their website they say they do seed deals, but if you actually look at like the deals they've done, they're Series A, really are a Series A firm. Those ones I think it's worthwhile keeping the relationship warm. If you're out raising a seed round, if it's a seed true seed fund and you are raising a seed round and they say no for any reason, like chances are they're never going to say yes, unless something fundamentally changes in your business. Doesn't mean you can't keep them updated with like a monthly. You can't have like a investor regular update that you send out to them. But I wouldn't spend a ton of time there. The other thing is like if you're a food tech company as an example, and I invest in a lot of food tech deals, and I tell you no, like probably not a good idea to ask me for introductions to other investors, which sometimes happens because like it's crazy. Like if I say no and you want me to introduce you to another, not because like I think about that, right? Like I'm going to introduce you to another food tech fund. The first thing I'm going to be like is are you investing? So like no, and here's why.
Yeah.
And that is not going to set you up for success with those investors. And so I wouldn't ask an investor that is like in your core like area to make introductions if they say no. And that happens a surprisingly large number of times where, when we pass like, oh, is there anybody else that might be interested? I'm like, well, if probably like you fit some these some other funds I know for sure, but I don't think you want the intro coming from me.
Yeah. Great advice. So we've kind of whittled down our list. We've set our meetings, found the right investors, hopefully. Let's get into kind of pitching and the deck and storytelling. Storytelling gets thrown around a lot in fundraising. But kind of first question is, does it move the needle? And then kind of related to that, I was reviewing some of your posts last night in preparation of today, and I saw one that you mentioned around like don't underestimate the vision slide and like the big vision, and that just shows you're thinking big and long-term potential. So maybe I already answered your question a little bit there, but like how do you think about, here's my question. How do you think about balancing vision and big long-term potential with like the stepping stones to get there, right? Because like sometimes you see decks and it's like, we're going to be this, $2 trillion company, and we're going to do all of these things. You're like, whoa, like you haven't even launched a product yet. So like, how do you help founders balance that like thinking big with like actually getting the work done?
Yeah, I mean, again, just coming back to what I said earlier, which is fundraising is a sales job, and how you tell your story matters in both sales and fundraising. And it doesn't mean you have to be like this gregarious, like outgoing extrovert to do a good job of it, right? Different people have different styles, and you should be true to yourself of how you go about your storytelling. Some people are very numbers driven and metrics driven, and if that works for you, great. But to get to like but you have to have a big vision, because you have to remember when we invest, we want companies that have the ability to have multi-billion-dollar outcomes, and most institutional funds are the same there. And if you can't like tell me a world where you live with that outcome, then I'm probably not going to invest in your company. The trick is what you said, like how do you tie it to what you're doing today? And so I think about like this as almost like sometimes like I use a video game analogy where where you're at today is stage one, right? And you have to beat stage one before you get to stage two. You have to beat stage two before you get to stage three, and eventually you beat the game. But you have to be able to tell a story of like, here's where we're at today, here's why we're crushing it, and here's why this is the right first step that will eventually unlock this big vision. And so you have to be able to connect the big vision to what you're doing today. And that's where people drop the ball is sometimes they forget the big vision, but sometimes they have this big vision and it's disconnected with what they're doing today. Or they're not good at explaining why it's connected to their big vision. And so you have to be able to say, this is what we're doing today, this is our wedge, this is our go-to-market, this is what is going to get customers interested. But once we're in, it does this, and this for us, which then gets us here, which does this, and this for us, which then gets to our big vision, right? And so you have to be able to really connect the dots in a credible way that people can follow along with you. Like, okay, like I can see that. That makes sense. Like, if that all happens, it probably will work. Knowing there's a lot of challenges along the way.
Yeah, great. Let's just say it's tomorrow. You wake up and you're like, let's remove half the slides from Founders Pitch Deck. Which ones would you remove? Like thematically across like all decks that you maybe you naturally don't gravitate to as much. And I guess on the flip side, is there anything that you would absolutely keep?
Yeah, I mean, for me, different investors have different feelings here. Like you can immediately never show me another competition slide. That's fine. I don't care about competition slides ever. If you have a slide, before you throw that one away, if you have a slide that shows like advisors to your company on it, like I would throw that one away first, because that's a waste of time. and a waste of space. So anytime if you have an advisory slide, if you have a competition slide, those are two slides that you can put them in your appendix if you really want to, but I wouldn't spend any airspace on those two things. Those are like the obvious ones to me to get rid of. I think that something that's making sure that you do have a slide around that vision, like what is the big vision, and that sometimes is missing in decks, is like you're so focused on what you're doing today. The other thing that I see, another thing that I see that maybe too much of is too much like on product in slides, where your product's important, but you're early stage, and founders tend to love their product, and so it's not necessarily that you shouldn't have it, but the amount of time allocated to product in a first pitch is often overweight relative to all of the other things. Again, this is personal preference. Like I prefer to get to know the founder, why they're doing it, more about them, why they're excited about it. Get a good feel for the founder in the first meeting, and then if I want to do a second meeting, the second meeting is often like a product deep dive. Like I get a product demo in a second meeting or a third meeting, and so that first meeting sometimes we get too much into the weeds of products, and I don't get to ask like a lot of the questions I find more interesting. So I'd be aware of that trap too. But for me, like first meeting's about, like I always say, the first meeting, if I get these two things out of a first meeting, I'm gonna be happy. Like, why the hell are you doing this? And then how are you gonna take over the world? And so those are the two things that I really want to figure out on in a first meeting.
Okay, great advice. Should I think about doing different decks depending on where I am in the funnel, right? Like maybe a smaller one for my initial intro email to the first meeting to the second meeting, or is your advice let's keep the deck and content the same throughout the fundraise?
Nope, I change it. I would have you should have something that you do use for all your outreach. That's your, like I call it your teaser deck. Could be an executive summary, could be a variety of different things, right? A short memo. But you should and that really only gives, what you don't want to do is you don't want to give an investor enough information in the first outreach to make an investment decision. You want to give them enough information to plant a hook so you can get a meeting. Your goal of that first little teaser is just get a meeting. And it should never be longer than 10, 11, 12 slides. If you're sending a deck out that's longer than 10, 11, 12 slides, it's too much. The deck you actually pitch off of can have as many slides as you want, right? Most of those should be in the appendix. And you should still have your core pitch that you're going to take. If you have let's say the average first investor meeting is 30 minutes. You shouldn't pitch for more than 12 to 15 of those 30 minutes. And you should leave the last 15 for Q&A. And so make sure you tailor your pitch to kind of that. In general, I call it the rule of half. If you have 20 minutes, you should pitch for no more than 10. If you have 30 minutes, you should pitch for no more than 15, et cetera, et cetera. But then if you have the slide, it can be really impressive if I ask you, hey, do you have a cohort analysis of, your customer retention over the last year? If you have a slide that shows that, it's in your appendix, that's awesome. That's impressive. So it doesn't hurt to have 40 slides in your pitch deck. You don't have time to go through all of those in your core pitch, but if you have a slide to be supportive, and then once you actually pitch, you can send the full deck out as a follow-up after that pitch, and that's not a problem. But you don't want to give them too much information prior to pitching. So you should have multiple presentations ready to go.
Okay.
Also, never do a live demo. I always recommend not doing live demos in general. You should do a pre-recorded demo, or make sure your demo is really on point, because it can even though we know fundamentally we're investing in early stage companies, it has a weird thing if you're trying to show me a demo and it's glitchy and shitty, that it might not. So recorded or really well pre-planned demo for product demos are really important.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. We now have investors. Kind of final question here before we actually flip over to the LP side of things. What's the best way to handle conflicting investor feedback? Right, I have multiple investors now on my cap table, whether they're angels or funds. Any advice on how I should put investor feedback through my own mental model versus my own gut and instinct as a founder? And then I got differing opinions from different folks. How should I navigate that world?
Yeah, I mean, you get to know your investors really well. Because that's really important for step 2, which is understand what your investors are good at. And so investors are not afraid to give advice or give feedback. And I think sometimes we even might give advice or feedback on stuff that we're not experts at. And so just really understand where are the strengths and weaknesses of your investor base, and then you can weight the feedback that they're giving you appropriately based on where their expertise lies. I think as a founder, your job, and the best founders do this so well, your job as a founder is to go out and collect data points. And then once you collect all the data points, make the decision that you think is right for your company. And so you have to live with your decisions, you have to make the decisions. So you got to go with what you think is right. And sometimes that might be against what all of your investors said. Um, Sometimes it might be against like what half your investors said. But if you don't go out and collect the data, you're doing yourself a disservice because they, investors, like what we have the benefit of is seeing what a giant portfolio of companies are doing. And so we can pattern match and say, hey, we've seen this here. Like this might be the same thing that's happening to you. And you can't, there's no way for you to be able to do that as a founder where we can do that for you. And so there's real value in investor feedback. And sometimes it might be conflicting. But your job is to collect those data points and then make the decision that you think is right for your company. So don't do yourself the service of not collecting it. I also think setting expectations of your investors from the beginning up front really well. I actually think that's what most investors want. They want strong founders that are going to make their own decisions. But even if you like have a real kind of skill, like say, hey, like throughout this journey, like I'm gonna like rely on you for feedback. I might not always follow what you say, but just know that I'm always like truly considering like the information that you're giving me. And if you set a foundation like that, where who's gonna get mad at that? But if you do that early on, that will help you in the long run of potentially going against half your investors and going with the other half. If you've set like, I'm going to always consider it, and be thoughtful about it, but I might not always go the direction. So that's another way to set yourself up for success from the communication world.
Fantastic. Kind of last part here. Since we last talked, I think over half of our revenue now is coming actually from venture funds, and we work with venture funds all over the world. And I'm curious to hear, as you've recently gone through this experience, what's similar and what's different about raising from LPs now that you've gone through it, and how has that changed your? I think you've always been a very empathetic GP towards founders, Brett, but has that changed at all now going through this more recently with Fund 4?
Yeah, and I've raised venture capital as a CEO of a startup too. So I've raised both for my startup and for funds now. And I mean, I don't think my level of empathy has changed at all. Like it's fundraising is never fun. It's such a weird thing, like you can, and that's why you need to be prepared to do it. Like sometimes it can be really easy. Like the first fund you meet is the one that leads you around, and that's kind of luck. Like honestly, like, you can be prepared, but what you should do as a founder is make sure you prepare like it's not going to be that, because it usually isn't, even though that does happen occasionally. There are some differences between, like one big difference is when you raise for a fund, it's usually a much longer period, especially for like an earlier stage fund like us. Like we just finished our fourth fund, but we're still considered like emerging managers. Like we're still not like a Sequoia that's been around for 40 years and is really, really well established, because in the venture world, it takes 15 years to establish yourself. And we were, our first fund was largely invested in 2018. So we're just hitting year 8. And so for earlier stage funds, it takes, a year to raise a round. And that's normal, where if you go a year without raising a round as a startup, you're in trouble, like something's not right. And so there's some real differences around timelines, horizons, who you pitch, but there's also a lot of real similarities. Like our investor base is a mix of high net worth individuals and institutional capital, just like a startup round is usually going to be. It's going to be angels and venture funds. We're raising from large institutions and high net worths also, and managing them. Communication is still really important, right? Throughout the entirety of the process. We still, we do quarterly LP letters, quarterly. We do, every time we make new investments, we do LP wide conference calls. Like, so if a company dies, like we do, like, we're really blunt, like upfront, like, hey, this company didn't succeed, didn't make it. We're gonna get $0. I invested $1 million in this company a year ago, and like it's now worth 0. And so even when things are not well, and making sure that we're communicating throughout, not just the good stuff that does happen in the portfolio as well. So that's the other thing is like both things it's a continual, never-ending process. Even when you're not fundraising, you're always having conversations, building relationships. That will hopefully make the next fundraise that you have easier on you. And so if you don't do anything between fundraises, you're just gonna, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot and make it more difficult.
Yeah, I love that. Like I said, we kick things off this year. We're really exploring the idea of relationships with yourself as a founder, with your investors, your team. Brett, curious, what's one professional relationship that's changed your life?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'm a confident guy, but I feel like I would have done okay, regardless of the paths and that I went on. But one that really stands out, obviously, like my team now, Bread and Butter, are all amazing. But I'm not gonna. That's the obvious answer, so I'm not gonna go with my current team at Bread and Butter. Um, and my partner Mary, partner on the platform side, Steph, like they're amazing. Um, but I met a guy named Justin Kershaw in 2016 or 2017, and it was when I actually pitched Techstars on building a food tech practice, and they said, sure, like it's a great idea, like build it and you can run it. Basically, is what the path that we went down. And I met this guy, and he was the CIO at Cargill at the time. And I probably pitched like 10 other people at Cargill before I met Justin, and like nobody was interested there. Um, and I met him, and I met another gentleman at Ecolab named Doug Baker, and like I remember meeting both of them, and they immediately bought into the vision and had the ability to say yes and actually make it happen. And if that hadn't happened, I probably would have stayed on the founder path.
Hmm.
Um, and so I actually my game plan was to build another startup, not to become an investor. So I never actually intentionally became an investor. I eventually did, but like when I sold my last company in 2015, I was planning on starting another company. That was the game plan. Like, I'm going to build another company. I'm always going to be a CEO of startups. I'm going to keep building companies. But having like the conversation with Justin, and getting it over the line, and basically having somebody believe in like, hey, yeah, we should build a food tech program, really changed the trajectory of like what direction I decided to go on, and move me into the investor path. And so I think if like I hadn't been able to get Doug Baker and Justin aligned, like I probably would have started another company, and who knows where that would have landed or ended up.
Very cool. Well, Brett, thank you so much for your time as always. Just love all the insights that we're going to be able to share here with founders in our community. Anything else you wanted to share? You want to plug anything for Bread and Butter? Anything else before we wrap up?
No, yeah, we're like I said, we're actively investing right now. We just raised another fund. If you think we align with you, would always love to meet great founders. We do, like I said, we do open office hours every Friday. Even if you're not aligned with our investment thesis, but just want some feedback or advice, anybody can grab time. Apologize, it does book out a little bit, but always happy to meet with founders. If you do want, Mike mentioned this earlier, if you are interested in, like, we do put a lot of content out there on YouTube, and then usually shared on LinkedIn as well. But I make like really short clip based videos, like with stuff that I learned as a founder or stuff that I've seen from our portfolio that tend to be like common themes around like best practices or worst practices, and try and share those out to help founders in their journeys, their entrepreneurial journeys. So feel free to follow us on LinkedIn or on the YouTube channel. So that's the only other thing I'd say.
Fantastic. All right, Brett. Thanks so much. Really appreciate the time.
Yeah, of course.
Okay.